Well, welcome. Welcome, everyone. I'm King County Executive Dow Constantine. I want to thank you for joining the first session of 12 Arguments for Change, Shaping King County's Post-COVID Future. You know, there's an understandable longing to get back to normal. The old normal was good. It was comfortable for an awful lot of people. But it was a dead end for many. People on the losing end of staggering income inequality. People under the thumb of deep ingrained racism. People without a home. We should aspire to be better. We need to be a community where every person can thrive, a nation that lives up to its founding promise. If that is what we want, if that is our commitment, then we can't just go back to normal. We have to seize the opportunity that this moment presents, the opportunity of these crises to create real, lasting, positive change. King County's strategies to fight COVID-19 have served as a model for the nation. We listened to science and public health experts, we acted with urgency, and we centered equity in our policy decisions. But we know this remains a hard time for everyone in our community. Health fears, economic insecurity, difficult conversations about structural racism, and uncertainty about the future. We want to collect and to amplify the conversations that many of us are already having with coworkers and neighbors, with family and friends and relatives about how we can make our nation's post-COVID future better, make it more equitable than the pre-COVID past. So through these discussions with community leaders, some of whom you'll meet in a moment, we hope to begin to describe a path toward a stronger, more equitable, more sustainable King County. Now, in tonight's session, we aim to identify and maybe even agree on key gaps our region needs to focus on in recovery. And then next week, we'll discuss potential solutions and then how to put those into action. Before I introduce those panelists, though, a few housekeeping items. First, we're hosting this as a Zoom webinar. Only the panelists have their microphones and cameras on. But audience members on Zoom can use the Q&A button at the bottom of their Zoom window to submit questions for the panel. We'll work on answering as many of those as possible throughout the session, and we'll also be monitoring comments and questions submitted by people joining on Facebook. Now then, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. Dr. Ben Danielson, Clinic Chief of the Odessa Brown Children's Clinic. Estela Ortega, Executive Director of El Centro de la Raza. Harpreet, owner of Punjab Suites in Kent. Gordon McHenry, President and CEO of United Way of King County. So I asked folks a pretty simple question to prepare for, just to get us going, to break the ice, and it really is simply sharing one key number, a statistic from your field of work in our community that tells an important story about the pandemic. We're going to go ahead and start with Dr. Danielson. Ben.
Well, first, thanks very much for allowing me to be part of this conversation today. It's such an honor to be with this group, and I have to start with thanking you, Executive Constantine, for your leadership throughout this time. It feels, in many ways, really comforting to be in this county at some of the hardest days for all of us. I'm not always a fan of what's the key number or what's the one thing we can do kind of stuff, because these conversations, these situations, the stories, the context is much richer, much more complicated, much more difficult than any one number. And I often think about the pandemic as, you know, in some ways nothing more than a great revealer, just a lifter of the veneer, and an exposer of maybe all of the numbers that we've in some ways known about all the time for many people, and in other ways have chosen to keep kind of covered over by that blanket. So I know that speaking with you, it would not be appropriate to say all of the numbers or the continuation of all of the numbers. And I will say that one number that I did notice that was worth at least prompting conversation was the number 91, and I'll explain that number. I've often tracked your county public health site for some of its information about disparities especially, and different rates of cases and hospitalizations and deaths for COVID-19. And one of the things I noticed was the incredible difference in the location of cases, the concentration of cases across our county. And so the number 91 represents the 91-fold difference between the places that have the least number of cases by census tract and the cases that have the most cases by census tract. None of the people on this panel would be at all surprised to know the place with the most. The places census tract wise are all South King County, in the South King County corridor, where for every health indicator, it's always showing up as the place that struggles the most with just about every health problem, all the way through to life expectancy. But I find that number 91 really important because it tells you that we are all experiencing this so differently, depending on just the neighborhoods, the places that we live in. And when it comes to understanding the issues of racism and the socioeconomic deprivation that our society casts on too many people, and the different ways that different communities are oppressed and marginalized, I think that 91 and that great difference, 91 times different exposure to this virus is also emblematic of how different our understanding, based on where we live and what our experiences are around issues of racism and capitalism and the other forms of oppressive difficulties that people face. So once again, COVID is this great revealer of where we are as a society and how heterogeneous our experiences are. We all know that that Seattle is still one of the fifth whitest large cities in this nation, and yet the zip codes that I serve and Gordon knows and Harpreet lives near and Estela serves, the 98118s and the 98882s and things like that, are like number 8 in diversity for the nation for zip codes of the 17,000 zip codes. So we live in this place where you open your door and what you see might really impact your understanding of issues of racism, of different economic and social and cultural experiences. And it makes me understand on some level, in a sad way, that it is not easy for us to have conversations that everyone can easily agree to. I'm already talking too long, so I'll pause there, but just consider a 91-fold difference in our experience of COVID and what that means about how different our neighborhoods and our places and spaces are in this county.
Thank you so much. Great way to start off. Really important reality for us to hold here. Estela Ortega, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dow. And it certainly is a privilege to be able to share information about the Latino community. And Ben, in speaking about South King County, there are 56% of Latinos now living in South County. And, obviously we've all heard about the high incidence of COVID within Latino communities, and there are numerous reasons for that, but that's not the question for right now. When COVID hit and El Centro de la Raza made a decision to close down, and some of our staff began to work remotely, we asked all of our 43 different programs to get in contact with their program participants and identify how they're doing, what are their needs. And our community services division kept track of how many calls were made from their department to program participants and how many calls were coming in to the community services division. And as of March 16th, through September the 4th, there have been over 11,220 calls, 22 calls to our social services division. And people are calling, with all sorts of needs, from rental assistance, food, help with utilities, evictions, when the schools closed down also, many families didn't have laptops so that their kids could, go to school online. They wanted help with being able to file for, make application for food stamps, their unemployment, and the list goes on and on. And so this gives you an idea of the need that exists, but also just, the incredible amount of work associated with that. And at the same time, trying to raise funds for all of those needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stella. Harpreet.
Hello.
Please.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I'd like to thank you, Dow and King County, for just letting me present my story, and then also to share a little bit more about my industry, which is the restaurant and bakery. For those of us, or those of you who haven't been there, I just have a little display behind me. It's called Punjab Sweets in Kent. And as Dr. Danielson, you had pointed out, South King County, where we're located in, is an extremely diverse community. And it's kind of very different in one sense from Seattle, because especially Kent too. Kent has over 140 languages. I don't know if a lot of people knew that, but it's just home to a lot of people from all over the world. So I think with that, we also have a lot of issues. And like you said, COVID has really uncovered a lot of those and kind of revealed, things that were already going on before. So a couple of statistics that I had that I thought were really key, as far as my industry, the restaurant industry, and also South King County, was 96% of hospitality and food service businesses have reduced hours and laid off staff. So that's a huge number right there, 96%. I mean, if we really take a look at that and really kind of think about it, how many families is that affecting? How many employees is that affecting? And then how does that affect our overall economy? Because we're all very interconnected, right? It doesn't matter if it's in the restaurant industry, aerospace, IT, we're all affected in some ways. Another statistic that really display this whole picture is almost 1,000 food establishments have not purchased their health food permit this year yet. So to me, the health food permit is maybe $800, $900. And so if you look at, how dire the circumstances are this year, a lot of these food establishments cannot even afford an extra $900 because many of these businesses are actually hanging on to a very small thread. And the difficult part, I think, is that, the statistics that we're showing or sharing right now is showing what's happened to date, what's happened so far. But we don't know what's going to happen in the next few weeks, next couple months. A lot of these businesses are on this verge. I mean, it's very time sensitive of what we can initiate, what we can do to help these businesses. I mean, I myself included, things are just vastly different as how they used to be before. I mean, we had dine-in, we had a lot of my customers used to come in from the east side, and now it's if it's just curbside pickup, I mean, they're going to drive 45 minutes, pick up, and then drive another 45 minutes back. It just doesn't make sense anymore. So I know that a lot of businesses have, especially food and restaurant businesses have kind of pointed that out, that it's just times have changed, like you said, Dow, they're so different nowadays. And so it's very hard to maintain, especially obviously in the last couple of months, I think almost 50% had been closed for so many months. So you still have fixed costs, you have all of these costs that are still outstanding. How are we going to make up for all of this, right? It's just, businesses are really struggling, and it's a really difficult situation, and especially in South King County, because I see that every day, day in and day out. And like you mentioned earlier, Dr. Danielson, and also Estela, is that a lot of these vulnerable communities live and work in South King County, and so there's already this wide disparity between income and healthcare and a lot of those gaps. But this whole crisis has really magnified all of it. So hopefully we can continue discussing all of these gaps today. So
thank you so much, and some consistent themes already emerging. Gordon McHenry, please go ahead.
Thank you, County Exec Dow. I really appreciate you getting us together and having us focus over a series of conversations on some really important challenges and hopefully strategies, for our community. The number that I'm going to call out is 72, and it's going back to April, when after United Way began to raise money and was successful, we raised about $5 million for rental assistance. And Estela talked about how important housing stability, homeless prevention is. And we said, oh, we've got $5 million. We probably can serve 2,000 households with rental assistance in April and May, or maybe May and June. So on Friday, we turn on application. 6,800 people applied in 72 hours. 6,800, people applied asking for assistance. And 53% of them were families. So I want us to think about that dynamic that we're talking about, families really struggling to stay in their homes. 611 were college students who are currently in one of our 10 community college, 2-year college programs, trying to better their lives to get a path toward living wage employment. And 72% were people of color, essentially double the collective number that reside in the great King County. 72% were folks of color seeking help just to stay where they currently are living. And I think Dr. Ben summarized it great. It is the great reveal that we have significant housing instability in addition to homelessness in our county, and it falls most heavily on our communities of color for reasons I think we'll probably talk about tonight. COVID, now it's September, greatly exacerbating underlying issues. So that'd be my number.
Thank you, Gordon. And I think we've really already established some powerful and important themes here. And there are others that I could think of that will probably end up getting woven in. But I heard about racism, of course. I heard about access to healthcare, about economic disadvantage historically, and the absence, the lack of economic opportunity, or the hurdles preventing people from doing better economically moving forward. And these things are all woven together. I mean, the number you just threw out there, 72% of people applying for the $5 million in rental assistance, people of color, people who've been marginalized in our community, people who've had less economic opportunity, not just in their own lives, but over the course of generations. Now that times are tough, those hardships are being thrown into much more dramatic relief. And I think that's what today's conversation is about. We've started off with a window into each of your fields, and I want to move to kind of that overarching theme, identifying challenges not just to recovery, but to an equitable recovery in King County. So panelists, assuming you agree with the thesis, of course, which from the statistics you gave, it kind of sounds like you do. What do you see as the biggest challenge or challenges to a recovery that is both full and equitable? We have as our sort of stated true north at King County that we are making this a welcoming community where every person can thrive. And so that's when I talk with our employees and have a conversation like this, I'm asking what's standing in our way of getting there. What challenges are particular in your view to King County? And we'll start again with Dr. Danielson.
Thank you again. And the components of that premise are very strong. And then there's this other piece that I just want to put out there because it risks creating a dissonance that we just have to maintain a clear vision on. So I think it's wrong to talk about recovery. I would love to, these days I end up making up words, so I'm going to make up the word equicovery. because a recovery, as you had said in your opening, is a return to a place that was really painfully difficult for too many sectors of our society in King County, across this country. And so to keep framing it around recovery, I think is disheartening to so many families who said, get back to what? Recover to a place of extreme hardship, of worse health outcomes, of less opportunity for my child and their progeny. So let's make up a new word and call it Equicovery, or something that really embraces the idea that we are not only talking about recovery, but we're talking about renaming a strategy and set of plans to reach a state of being that we talk about so loftily in all of our conversations. So I know that's what we actually care about achieving. So, okay, I've made up words. I will say that among the challenges, they are so intertwined and interlinked. I'm a pediatrician, and very, very early into my career, someone much smarter than me taught me that education and health are so intertwined for any young person that you can't educate an unhealthy child, and you can't keep an uneducated child healthy. Those two things are so woven together that I worry about what we are doing to educational opportunities for those who have already been underserved by our current educational system prior to this pandemic. And we see the lessons that we should be learning from so many other places. We have seen how Hurricane Katrina devastated communities and then left the communities of color still in a place very, very far behind in terms of educational opportunity and achievement, even now, many, many, many years after other parts of that community might have called themselves, quote, recovered. So that devastation that I think we are witnessing in a horrific way right this moment around education is such an important component. I also think specific to King County, there are some factors that just have to be better understood, that we have to understand that we had been disinvesting in so many communities around our county in ways that have been the product of hard decisions, bad decisions, and no decisions, I would guess. But there are parts of King County that are unincorporated, places like Skyway, where the lack of infrastructural support and investment has been something that has been a problem for generations and is now going to play itself out as an extreme challenge moving forward. We have other places that we just know that we were underinvesting in, that an Equicovery will actually require a super investment in. I'm making up all kinds of phrases here, but I think there's something in these themes that we have to pay attention to. And I also think what is not unique to King County, but is extremely important, is this historic trend of disinvesting in public health infrastructure is going to be a continually difficult challenge for us to face as a county, as a state, and as a nation. We already started with a underinvested public health infrastructure, and then we've in the last 20 years especially eroded that support in ways that have been really critical but invisible, and now they're going to become much, much more visible. The last thing I'll mention for this state and for this county is that we have such a regressive tax structure that every time we are mentioning the communities hit most hard by every factor that we've talked about, racism, the pandemic's effects directly, the pandemic's reveal of other forms of oppression and marginalization, we are also putting the cost on their backs at the same time for whatever we would want to call something close to an Equicovery. I'll pause there and stop ranting.
Thank you so much, and thanks for bringing up my favorite topic to rail about, which is the state's broken tax system. We could spend many hours in the panel talking just about that. Estela Ortega, take it away.
Yes, thank you. And I'll speak from the vantage point of the difficulties that families will face in terms of the recovery. For one thing, you know, with the rental assistance, and the demand is so great that the families that called us, we were only able to help them with $500 at a time, you know, when their rents are like up, you know, at over $1,000, $1,200. And so people are creating, I mean, there's a lot of back rent debt, if you will, and that's going to be difficult for people to overcome, and how to get out of that debt. People are going to be sent to collections. You know, they don't have possibilities for jobs, especially with thousands of people seeking employment. In the Latino community, those who were in the service industry don't have the marketable skills that people need to be able to, you know, for the jobs to have a good family wage. And so again, you're going to see more evictions, you're going to see foreclosures. And as a result, the reality that's going to happen is that we're going to see more homelessness. And as a result also of all the debt that people have at this moment, their credit scores are going to be impacted. And this is going to create serious problems in terms of them being able to find future housing. And secondly, what I want to say is a challenge that I see to the recovery is that we need to create new revenue sources to address the disparities, to create equity in our communities.
So Gordon, we're going to go to you. The biggest challenges you see kind of specific to King County in creating Ben's Equicovery.
Yeah, great. This panel, designed by a very smart and experienced county exec, shows the intersectionality that exists and the challenges that we're discussing, and the intersectionality that exists for our communities who are living on low incomes, our communities of color, our immigrant and refugee communities. And so at United Way, I could pick any one, but Estela, who's a partner, El Centro de la Raza is a partner of ours in rental assistance, and we work closely with Odessa Brown, some of the folks we co-serve. So yeah, I see the challenge of having stable housing on a long-term basis, a healthy place for a young person to grow up, to be a part of an educational system that we know really starts at birth, has critical milestones, you know, at age 3 and age 5 and age 6, and you need that healthiness. And so I see education, equitable, culturally appropriate, consistent, active education experience and success as a long-term necessity to combat intergenerational poverty and to reinstill hope in many of our communities of color, especially among our young folks who are really struggling with the pandemic of racism. And then I think the other one would be such a great place to live and grow up in. And I'm one of those natives here. And we have a housing affordability crisis that sits on top of a housing instability crisis, which sits on top of a homeless crisis. And so and Stella hit it on the head right, we have to find a way to have more resources to help people stay in their house, stay in their homes, and not spend 50, 60, 70% of whatever income they're bringing in on just maintaining rent without all the other aspects to have a family living with dignity and purpose.
Thank you, and we've had Harpreet rejoin us, and the question on the table right now is, what are the biggest challenges to a recovery, or as Ben said, Equicovery, that is both full and fair, that everyone can participate and be lifted up by, unlike the pre-COVID reality that we were living in.
Sorry, I have some technical difficulties there. So I'm not sure if Estela has mentioned this because I missed a part of it, but I do feel like, especially right now with how childcare and education is such a huge part of our economic growth and how we're going to move forward, because I'm sure a lot of you know too, families are struggling because they are not only the childcare, but they're also homeschooling their kids. They're facilitating these Zoom online calls all day for 4 to 5 hours for not even one child, but multiple children that they have. And so previously, if these families were relying on multiple incomes, now they've had to survive on one income. So I think that's a huge challenge in order for us to move forward. So, and it's going to affect all industries, because people were working in various sectors, prior to COVID. And so a lot of these families now are not going to be able to do that, because, we don't have maybe safe childcare right now, or affordable or accessible childcare. And so along with that, education is tied. So there's just such a strong impact on our economy right now that I feel like that has to be taken into consideration in order for all of us to be able to even think about moving forward at this moment.
So that, I think, leads us well into the next question. And by the way, on the issue of childcare and kind of the other infrastructure that people need in order to be able to live economically secure lives, successful lives of contributing back. We're going to have a chance to talk about that in the weeks and months to come as we look to the renewal of Best Starts for Kids, King County's, I think, nation-leading bid to invest in the life of every young child and their families in order that we all might have the opportunity to thrive. There is clearly, coming out of this, a need to make sure people, even if we create jobs, people have the opportunity to train for those jobs and to apply for them and to be able to go to work and still be able to make sure the kids are well cared for. I want to remind folks who are watching, if you wouldn't mind posting your questions here on Zoom in the Q&A section or in the comments on Facebook. So moving on, we've had enormous prosperity in this region. And, that is in many ways a good thing, although it also has some really significant consequences, bad unintended consequences. But we've really had enormous inequities as well. And the inequities have been revealed in the form of gross income inequality, of people being squeezed out of the housing market, and on and on. And while there is tremendous opportunity at the upper end of the economy, a lot of the middle even has disappeared. I mean, for example, the erosion of manufacturing jobs or aerospace jobs that have been the bread and butter of this region, this sort of doorway into the middle class. And a huge part of the population, namely, and specifically people of color, have been left out of all of that from the start because of the racial bias built into all manner of systems, many of which have been mentioned tonight, and the consequent lack of access to opportunity. So thinking about these challenges and their effects on the region, what do you see in King County history that has brought us to this point, brought about the really stark inequality and the embedded inequities that COVID-19 has revealed and exacerbated? And we'll just go through in the same order again. Dr. Danielson.
Thank you for, all of these just softball questions. These are really straightforward and easy ones. These are great places to create a lot of thought and to conjure up different ideas. I want to respond in a bimodal manner. I'll start by saying the Odessa Brown Children's Clinic is 50 years old, and it is a manifestation of a demand by a community, a largely Black community, to reclaim the tools of opportunity in different ways in order to see the next generation see more opportunity than the last. And really proud of that history, and so honored to be in a place that those amazing Black women started 50 years ago and continue to live on here. I also know that the forces of disseminating and destroying communities has been a powerful factor in King County. the sort of squeeze and push of redlining and other practices that segregated and separated communities and continues to practice informally today, and then the push of displacement and separating families from elders, from resources, from places of worship, from places of connectedness. That is a powerfully disseminating and destructive factor, and we have to really live up to that and know that. And we have to also know from this data side that wealth gaps matter. Wealth gaps matter more than wealth matters. In a way, matter more than poverty matters. And what I mean by that, that there are good studies that have shown that the biggest impact on your health, actually regardless of your income, is whether you live in a place with a great amount of gap between rich and poor, as opposed to just where you are in your own station. The greater the gap, the sicker everyone is. And that's been shown. And we are a pretty strong example of that in this county. 2 out of the 3 richest people in the world are, within, okay, they don't invite me over very often, but they're close by. The other thing I just want to say, though, and I want to turn this a little bit, because I always get a little wary of us only talking difficult, challenge, negative, and all of the detriments that are at play here. And I just want to bring in the opportunity to also just put the seed of the power of community into this conversation. Because I also see, even in these smoke-hazed dark days, this incredible hope in the power of community. The same communities that 50 years ago made a demand and created their own economic powers, then are still these same communities that have the power to reclaim, to rename, to bring back to fruition the power of diversity, the creativity and the iterativeness that different thinking, different minds, different backgrounds and different cultures have to make an incredibly powerful, greater county and greater set of communities. The power of community and really understanding how that works, really naming that and investing in that and understanding that is just such a potential for us to be really looking at how we turn the tables around and get towards equicovery or whatever we want to call it, and really start thinking about where the answers are, where the absolute answers are, which I guess is, again, why, as Gordon said, a very wise person convened a group of people who've been really talking and working within communities for a long time. So I just want to introduce this concept of communities are the answers. They are the places that we need to be looking to. And it's a strength that is, I think, going to be tapped more and more and more as we move forward. And it's going to make a beloved society out of us.
Thank you. And you touched on a lot of things I had jotted down when I asked myself this question. But, in terms of this being the panel of problems, that's what you're supposed to be. The next panel is the one that gets to come up with happy solutions. So, sorry, next time we do this, you can be on the sunny side of the street. Okay, Estela, please go.
Yes, so in terms of answering the question around what has led to the inequities with COVID, and I feel like it's, to be straight up about it, the disproportionate impact on from COVID with Black and Latino communities is a result of structural racism. I mean, we have to say it clearly that that's what it is, and that historically it has limited access to resources and opportunities for those communities, as well with the Indigenous and Asian communities. And there are so many issues as a result of structural racism, from that low wages, that workers are not paid family wages. We're all looking at $15 an hour and trying to get there, but that's not enough. That's not a family wage for people. And so added to that is that our communities have been harmed by generational poverty, the lack of safe and affordable housing, the educational opportunities, the work opportunities, healthcare, the lack of healthcare for many people. And that's just to name a few, because the list can go on and on also. Dow, I want to tell you mil gracias for declaring that racism is a public health issue, which is so important. And I hope that our governor will be able to declare that Washington State also can say that racism is a public health issue. With that being said, it is our expectation that the policies and the work of undoing structural racism will center racial equity in our communities.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate your kind words, but that was the work of many activists and of our fine public health director, Patty Hayes, and we were very pleased to be able to do that, and it sets the stage for us to do some things that are informed by the methodology and the rigor of public health discipline, but there's much more as well beyond that, and you'll see some of it in my proposed budget that goes directly to our anti-racism agenda. This is at the core of this work. There's a great economic aspect, but much of that economic disparity is tied to racial disparities, to racism that's embedded in our systems. Please, Harpreet, go ahead.
Thank you. So I agree with both Dr. Danielson and Estela. I think a lot of it just comes down to we don't really have a social safety net anymore, and I think because of that, then there's these huge disparities we see, right, in with racism, with the income gap, and so right now, as we were talking, it's like revealed so much more than it really was prior to COVID, and just as someone who lives and works in South King County, I see it daily, just with my neighbors, my customers, my community. A lot of the people that live and work there, as we mentioned, they have lower income, they have less education, they have little to no health care. And so a lot of these people, even their positions, even their jobs right now, many of them are essential workers. So they're exposed more, they're likely to be more exposed as well, prone to being exposed because of the jobs that they do, as opposed to many of their counterparts, like in Seattle or East Side. I think, if they're telecommuting, working from home, it's a different scenario in those areas and communities. And so a lot of these workers can't miss work, or because of healthcare, they're not able to get the access to healthcare in order to feel better, in order to fight, some of these viruses or diseases. And so overall, it just creates this kind of scenario that we're seeing right now, why South King County is affected so much more than other communities. And I see that especially in the hospitality and the restaurant industry. I mean, a lot of the people that are working in those industries, as the numbers have shown, there have been reduced hours, reduced staffing. And so obviously, more homelessness, more people that are having all of these issues that are affecting them. So it's a myriad of issues. It's just not one. There's just so many that are affecting communities right now.
Thank you so much. And Gordon, go ahead.
Thank you. I agree with all that has been stated, and I think I would like to elaborate a little bit on the importance of income and wealth disparities. So I'm born and raised in King County, and when I was growing up, if you lived on low or moderate income, you lived inside of the city of Seattle. More often than not, and I mean that more often than not, you owned a home. Our economies have shifted, and our places of residence have shifted, and so we now benefit from a tech community. People who live on low and moderate incomes don't live in the city of Seattle. They live in South King County and now some in North King County because it's more affordable. But they're renting. They're not, more than not, they're renting, not home ownership. And we live in a capitalist society where wealth is derived from home ownership, generally at least 2 generations. And if you get to 3 generations, you probably have wealth that's rooted in the stock market and investments. So in 1 generation, many of our communities, and coincidentally communities of color, have not benefited from income, to Stella's point, of living wages, family wages. They don't have a home that they own or can own. They don't have wealth that is rooted in property, much less in intangible property called the stock market. So our income and wealth disparities exist in ways that people would not think would exist in a progressive West Coast county that has about 1/3 urban, 1/3 suburban, and 1/3 rural. And it's like, oh no, you never have those kind of East Coast or Deep South issues. And we have them. And we also have the issue of race. And it shows up, as Estela said, and Dr. Ben and Harpreet said, it shows up structurally, systematically. And so we haven't dealt with that race issue. And we have not, our generation, we've aged, and our generation is no better. In fact, they're worse off in terms of income. And I don't even talk about wealth in the communities that I work with and serve, because there is no wealth. It's really a desperation to get from minimum wage to living wage. And sometime in the future, maybe your family will have some wealth that they can pass on. And we've got to do something about that now.
Thank you all for those thoughtful answers. I mean, there are, even with all of this, some issues that I think are going to be important to have in this conversation that haven't come up yet. For example, I think environmental justice is a vital part of the conversation. I mean, environmental challenges affect us all, but they tend to fall hardest, like all challenges, they tend to fall hardest on communities of color and those who have the least. And similarly, the criminal legal system, while theoretically applicable to everyone, falls with much more weight on Black, Indigenous, Hispanic, Latino, people of color, those who have historically been marginalized and kept away from opportunity. And it's not just about the potentially dire consequences immediately, but about a lifetime of having to carry a conviction and criminal history with you and trying to access economic opportunity and everything that a very prosperous community like this has to offer. It is, and I could go on. We had a question about whether we should be deeply investing in culture and arts as part of the public health emergency, and that's from Kelly. And you know, one of the challenges we have is trying to keep the things that make this community great and a vibrant place to live. And we're very determined in that work to both keep arts, heritage, culture alive, but also to make sure that those investments are equitable, that we are investing in all communities and not just in the longest standing and largest and best heeled organizations. And I think that we have a really good chance coming out of this to reset the conversation around the central role, both economically and culturally, of the arts. I did get a question from Claire about the changes to the state tax system this session, and there are individual proposals that are being considered, most of which would probably go into creating new revenue to make up for some of the horrific shortfall that the state is facing. But the holistic, comprehensive rewrite of the state's tax system that is so needed is not yet really in queue for this session, although great legislators have been working on this over the course of the last year or two. But that's something we're all going to have to get behind, even though it's not maybe very glamorous. If we all just paid our fair share, we could do everything this community needs: physical infrastructure and human infrastructure and restoration of the natural infrastructure without breaking a sweat. But the tax system is so upside down that even one of the wealthiest communities in the country can't do the basic things we need for every person to have that opportunity to thrive. I think we're moving to the final set of questions now. And so far today, we've covered key stats that speak to the stories of the pandemic, and I thought those were fascinating. We've identified challenges to recovery, and we've discussed sort of the inequities that existed prior to the pandemic, but have really revealed themselves now in the historical context around those. What I want to ask you is this. considering today's conversation, what do you think our priority or priorities for this equitable recovery should be? What matters most to you and why? And I'm going to mix up the order this time, and I'm going to ask Harpreet, could you go first?
So I think for me personally and my community, I think the priority that I see is making sure that we collaborate together, pool resources together as, you know, all the different communities and the different municipalities, and work together to really make sure that we're being equitable in assisting the smaller businesses in more of the vulnerable communities, and making sure that they don't get lost in the shuffle, you know, because a lot of the more wealthier communities have more resources, have more connections, have more, you know, just ability to maybe apply for grants, apply for funding, and get those, get that money in order to move forward and get, you know, more cash reserves. But I really, I guess, think about some of these smaller, vulnerable communities, these food establishment places that they're not just like food places, they're actually social gathering places, as I see it. And I see this in a lot of like Black communities, Indigenous groups, people of color. I mean, people congregate to these places because it's a way for them to connect. It's a way for them to also just kind of still be rooted to their, you know, their history, their culture, and, you know, kind of talk about their celebrations. I mean, I know for us, you know, Diwali is like a huge celebration in October, November, and people from all communities come, you know, and they celebrate, and they kind of, you know, ask questions. Oh, what is this about? You know, we explain what, you know, what Diwali is about, why it's such a huge celebration in India. And I don't want to, I mean, what I'm hoping is that we can preserve a lot of these smaller communities or smaller establishments, because they're kind of the lifeblood, or like the lifeline of our economy. And if we don't have those anymore, and we just, you know, have chains like Arby's and McDonald's and those left, it's just going to change the landscape of our communities. And I would hate to see that very much.
Thank you. As we've watched what's happened in our community, I have seen many of the places that made this place interesting and a richer experience for me. Places I cherished closed forever. And I really want us to keep pushing our state and federal government to help provide the resources we need to help people and small businesses through this this pandemic, however long it lasts, so that we can begin the wheels of commerce turning again and be able to have a place that's worth living in, with jobs that people can use to take care of their families when this is over. Let's go ahead and turn to you, Gordon. Do you have any thoughts on kind of what our biggest priority or priorities should be moving forward?
Sure. A goal I would assert, a priority I would assert, is affordable housing. And by that I mean the ability for all parts of our community to be able to aspire and achieve home ownership that makes sense for them and their family. I want that affordable housing to be throughout King County, all parts of King County. And this priority is based upon an assumption or a prerequisite that there is a quality, there are quality, culturally appropriate and effective public education systems in all parts of King County. And I want that affordable housing within 10 years, and I want that that education now, so that our young people have hope and will do everything they can do, and hopefully choose to stay and be able to stay in King County.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Estela.
Yes, thank you. I guess there's two things. One is that I believe that our communities want to work. They want to be put back to work. The challenge there then is that, you know, thousands of jobs have disappeared. And so we need training for the new opportunities, the new jobs for the future for people. And at the same time, in particular, we need technological training, computer training for everyday people, because we know that the jobs of the future, there's some element of technology within them, even if they're entry-level jobs. So that's one of mine. And the second thing is that I would Just recently, the governor, a report came out from his poverty work group that put together a 10-year plan for the future of reducing poverty and inequality in Washington state. You know, when you have structural racism, that leads to poverty. And so I would ask that the county take a look at that, because it was a statewide report that they spoke to hundreds and hundreds of people throughout the state of Washington on what their needs are. And I think that there's something to learn from there.
And Dr. Ben.
I'm going to be lofty for a second and just cruising the clouds a little bit. But one thing I will say, I think our priorities need to be holding very tightly to addressing racism for every reason and every life sacrificed and every recognition of the history of this country and this community. We need to keep ourselves focused on addressing and expunging racism. I think that means that King County needs to declare itself aspiring to be an anti-racist county, and that there should be a comprehensive plan that is unapologetically laser focused on anti-racism in all of its policies and programs. I think that means that we need to let go of what I think is across our society, not just this county, the ill of incrementalism. I think that incrementalism has become one of the greatest barriers to progress, really meaningful progress. And it is devastating to me, the idea that we have voiced through uprising and protest and recognition of the deaths of so many, especially Black and men and women in this moment, that if we do not hold ourselves to a higher level of action than incrementalism, then this will be an irrevocable lost opportunity for us to make big change. I wonder about our willpower as a society and as a community. Where is our will? It feels like people will get tired from the day-to-day things they're facing, from the environmental things we're seeing, from the unseeable threat of the pandemic that is around us. And I want our priority to be willpower and courage in order to be an anti-racist county and have that happen and have all of us have your back in that work. There has to be an incredible amount of willpower. And I know we have it. We just watched ourselves as a country wreck our own economy in order to try to address a pandemic caused by coronavirus. What can we do for a problem that is so many more times greater than coronavirus, and I mean racism, in order to make fundamental changes? What willpower, what sacrifices, what energy can we bring to bear? And we need to do that. We cannot lose our focus.
That is a perfect way to wrap the conversation for today. Really, you've hit on exactly why we wanted to have this conversation. All of the things that everyone on this panel and everyone in our community, I think, aspires to for this country, all those things seemed out of reach, or the progress seemed maddeningly slow, incremental, as it were. But suddenly we're at a moment where a genuine breakthrough is possible, and we have to seize it. We have to seize it, and that's why we have to keep having these conversations about what are we willing to do? What commitments are we willing to make? I think that what I've heard today is we need to find a way to provide economic opportunity for everyone who wants and needs to work, and to make that work pay, and to provide the infrastructure so that they can do that. Housing that goes beyond the shelter mat on the floor, and that provides dignity and the opportunity to get your feet under you and start taking advantage of that economic opportunity. I would say investing in communities so that they have the capacity to help co-create the solutions that we need, and centering, really, I think you're right, Doctor, centering everything we do on anti-racism, on understanding that racism is not simply a vestige of a troubled past, that it explains much of the challenge that we have, the disconnect between our reality and the ideals, whether it's the ideals expressed in the founding in this country or the ideals that we articulate on behalf of Martin Luther King County. And we can do that. I mean, I will tell you that I think that this community and probably this country is ready for that transformational change. And it's up to a lot of us to help tee that up and push it forward. Thanks to all of our panelists. I'm thrilled that you were able to join us for such an interesting conversation at session 2 next Tuesday, September 15th. The new group of panelists will continue the conversation by brainstorming solutions to some of the challenges discussed tonight and maybe some others they'll identify. If you haven't already signed up at Eventbrite, please do so. I want to wrap things up with a big thank you to all of you, Ben, Estela, Harpreet, Gordon, and thanks to everyone who joined us tonight with your thoughtful questions. Recording the session is going to be available on the King County Executive Facebook page. I want you to all have a safe and enjoyable evening. Thank you so very much.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.